From chemical companies poisoning entire communities while their executives to pharmaceutical empires that killed hundreds of thousands while their owners bought museums and universities to clean their names. Today, you'll discover the shocking truth about 10 millionaire families who turned generational wealth into generational crime, manipulating governments, buying silence, and literally getting away with murder for decades. The Sackler family story begins way back in 1952 when three brothers named Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond bought a tiny pharmaceutical company called Purdue Frederick. These weren't your typical business tycoons. They were medical doctors who grew up in Brooklyn during the 1930s as children of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. All three went to medical school and actually did some good early on, pioneering medication techniques that replaced lobotomies and fighting for racial integration of blood banks. Arthur was the marketing mastermind of the bunch. He basically invented modern pharmaceutical advertising by creating campaigns that targeted doctors directly and got prominent physicians to endorse their products. But here's where things get dark. In 1996, Purdue Pharma released OxyContin, and that's when the family really started showing their true colors. If you think you know how the wealthy protect themselves, think again. Hit that like button if you're ready to see how money can literally buy immunity from murder charges. The company claimed OxyContin provided 12 hours of pain relief, which was way longer than other painkillers. Problem is, their own clinical trials had already proven this wasn't true before the drug even hit the market. They also told everyone it was less addictive than other opioids because of its slow-release formula. Complete lie. Their sales staff got trained to be super aggressive and received bonuses based on how many prescriptions they could generate. They literally tracked doctors' prescriptions, visited their offices, bought them meals, and asked them to put specific patients on Purdue drugs. The company paid doctors nearly $100,000 to promote their opioids while assuring them OxyContin was totally safe. But the deception goes even deeper. Purdue created fake educational materials disguised as scientific knowledge. One piece told doctors that signs of addiction were actually something called pseudo-addiction, and the solution was to prescribe even more opioids. They spread false information to universities and funded scientists who would speak favorably about prescribing opioids. When patients started getting addicted exactly as prescribed, Purdue executives blamed them for using the drug improperly. They claimed people were crushing pills to snort or inject them, but patients taking the medication exactly as directed were still becoming addicted and dying from overdoses. The company had been getting concerns from doctors about addiction risks since 1996, the year OxyContin launched. The timing of some family actions looks incredibly suspicious. In 2005, Mortimer Sackler opened several Swiss bank accounts just 1 month before federal prosecutors filed a lawsuit against Purdue Pharma. The lawsuit alleged the company had lied about OxyContin's addiction risks. These Swiss accounts held over $31 million and controlled 4 other trusts and companies registered in Jersey. Between 2008 and 2017, as lawsuits started piling up and scrutiny intensified, the Sackler family withdrew over $10 billion from Purdue Pharma. That's a massive increase from the $1.3 billion they took out between 1995 and 2007. Much of this money went into personal trusts, holding companies, and offshore accounts in tax havens like the British Virgin Islands and Luxembourg. They didn't just hide money domestically either. The New York Attorney General discovered the family transferred $1 billion to Swiss bank accounts while they were supposedly negotiating settlements over the opioid crisis. This pattern shows they were systematically moving assets out of reach while facing mounting legal pressure. The family's pharmaceutical empire extends way beyond just Purdue Pharma. Through their company Mundipharma, they've been selling opioids in over 120 countries, continuing to rake in hundreds of millions in profits. Even after all the legal troubles in the United States, their international operations have kept the money flowing. What makes this whole saga particularly infuriating is how the Sacklers maintain their public image as generous philanthropists while privately orchestrating one of the deadliest public health disasters in American history. They donated millions to museums and cultural institutions, getting their name plastered on buildings and wings, all while their company's marketing practices were killing people. The Justice Department has called their behavior a deliberate effort to micromanage a deceptive sales campaign. They weren't just negligent business owners who made mistakes. They actively participated in creating and spreading false information about their product safety while knowing full well how dangerous it was. Recent settlements have reached $7.4 billion, but many states argue this isn't nearly enough given the over $9 billion in profits that remain unaccounted for. The Sackler name has become permanently associated with corporate greed and the devastating opioid epidemic that has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives across America. The DuPont dynasty started in 1802 when a French immigrant named Eleuthère Irénée DuPont fled the French Revolution and set up shop making gunpowder along Delaware's Brandywine Creek. His family wasn't just escaping political turmoil, they were Protestant Huguenots running from religious persecution. DuPont had studied with the famous chemist Antoine Lavoisier before arriving in America, and he quickly realized American gunpowder quality was terrible compared to what Europeans were making. The business exploded during the War of 1812, and by the Civil War they were supplying between 1/3 and half of all gunpowder used by the Union Army. The family kept tight control over their empire for generations, expanding from explosives into chemicals, synthetic fibers, and eventually creating household names like nylon, Teflon, Lycra, and Mylar. But behind their respectable corporate image, they've been hiding devastating secrets that have literally poisoned communities for decades. The biggest scandal involves a chemical called perfluorooctanoic acid, known as PFOA or C8. Starting in 1951, DuPont began using this chemical at their Washington Works plant in West Virginia to manufacture Teflon coating. They knew it was toxic as early as 1961, but they kept that information completely secret. In 1981, DuPont discovered that female employees working with PFOA were giving birth to babies with serious birth defects. Instead of warning the public or stopping production, they quietly pulled women off the Teflon manufacturing line and kept the birth defect information hidden. 3 years later in 1984, their own testing confirmed that PFOA was contaminating drinking water around the plant, but company executives decided that reducing emissions wasn't economically attractive. The contamination got worse throughout the 1980s and 90s. DuPont employees discovered unusually high numbers of leukemia deaths at the West Virginia plant in 1989, followed by an unexpected spike in kidney cancers among male workers. These weren't isolated incidents affecting only workers who directly handled the chemical, but plant-wide health problems that should have triggered immediate action. The cover-up might have continued indefinitely if not for a cattle farmer named Wilbur Tennant. In the 1980s, DuPont bought land from Tennant to use as a landfill for what they claimed were non-hazardous materials. The land contained a creek that flowed directly into the Ohio River, and Tennant started noticing his cattle were dying under mysterious circumstances. He watched hundreds of his cows die after drinking from the contaminated creek, many with bizarre symptoms and deformities. When Tennant sued DuPont in 1998 with attorney Rob Billett, the lawsuit uncovered internal company documents proving DuPont had known about PFOA contamination in plant workers and groundwater for decades. The case revealed that DuPont had been dumping PFOA waste directly into unlined landfills and releasing it into the air and water without any permits or regulations. The Environmental Protection Agency eventually discovered that DuPont had violated environmental laws for 20 years between 1981 and 2001 by failing to report instances where PFOA was found in groundwater and human blood, including pregnant women. The company was forced to pay $10.25 million in fines plus $6.25 million for environmental projects, which was the largest civil penalty the EPA had ever obtained under any federal environmental statute at that time. But the health consequences were already devastating. Scientific studies found that PFOA exposure was linked to kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, high cholesterol, ulcerative colitis, and pregnancy-induced hypertension. The chemical stays in human bodies for up to 4 years and has been found in the blood of 99% of Americans. Laboratory studies on animals showed PFOA caused liver, testicular, and breast cancers. A class action lawsuit representing 50,000 people in the Ohio River area led to an unusual settlement where DuPont agreed to fund scientific studies on PFOA health effects. The resulting C8 science panel studied 55 health outcomes and concluded that PFOA was probably linked to 6 major diseases. Meanwhile, the DuPont family's personal scandals were equally shocking. In 2008, Robert H. Richards IV, great-grandson of chemical magnate Irene DuPont and heir to the family fortune, pleaded guilty to raping his 3-year-old daughter. The girl told her grandmother that her father had called it their little secret, but that she didn't want Daddy touching her anymore. Despite being convicted of a Class C violent felony that typically carries over 2 years in prison, Richards received only probation. Delaware Superior Court Judge Jan Jordan sentenced him to 8 years but suspended the entire sentence, saying the wealthy heir would not fare well in prison. His defense attorney actually argued that sex offenders like Richards, described as a rich white boy who is a child pervert, couldn't be protected in prison. The sentencing sparked national outrage about how wealth influences the justice system. Richards paid just $4,395 to Delaware's Violent Crimes Compensation Board while continuing to receive support from the family trust. His ex-wife later filed a civil lawsuit alleging he had also sexually assaulted their infant son, though no criminal charges were filed for that alleged abuse. These scandals show how the DuPont family has used their wealth and influence to cover up crimes spanning from environmental poisoning that affected thousands of people to child sexual abuse within their own family. Their legacy demonstrates how generational wealth can shield families from consequences that would destroy ordinary people. The Murdaugh story begins all the way back in 1920 when Randolph Murdaugh Sr. got elected as solicitor for South Carolina's 14th Judicial Circuit. This wasn't just any prosecutor's job, it covered 5 entire counties and gave the family massive power over who got charged, who got convicted, and who walked free. For the next 86 years, from 1920 to 2006, 3 generations of Murdaugh men held this exact same position, making it the longest family control of a prosecutor's office in United States history. Randolph Sr. also founded what became Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Elsroth and Dietrich law firm, known as PMPED, in 1910. They specialized in personal injury cases and got ridiculously good at extracting massive settlements from corporations. Local lawyers said they could turn a $100,000 case into a $1 million settlement through sheer manipulation and intimidation. Their judicial circuit became known as a plaintiff's paradise where companies would avoid doing business entirely rather than risk getting sued there. The family's grip on power was so complete that locals called the region Murdaugh Country. They weren't just prosecutors and lawyers, they were the unofficial rulers of the South Carolina Low Country, controlling everything from criminal prosecutions to civil settlements. Everything started unraveling on February 24, 2019, when 19-year-old Paul Murdaugh took his friends out partying on the family's boat. The group spent hours drinking at an oyster roast before heading to downtown Beaufort to continue partying at bars. Security footage shows Paul buying alcohol earlier that day and loading it onto the boat in coolers. By the time they left the bars around 1:15 in the morning, Paul was completely wasted with a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit. Despite being visibly intoxicated, Paul insisted on driving the boat home. His friends begged him to let someone else drive, but he refused and started acting aggressively, driving in circles and fighting with passengers. Around 2 in the morning, the boat slammed into Archers Creek Bridge at high speed. The impact threw everyone overboard, but only 19-year-old Mallory Beach didn't make it out of the water. Her body was found over a week later, 5 miles from the crash site, after dying from drowning and blunt force trauma. Paul got charged with 3 felony counts, including boating under the influence and causing Mallory's death. He was facing 25 years in prison when he died, but the family's influence seemed to be protecting him from serious consequences. Even after the crash, Paul continued partying on boats, getting caught by wildlife officers with coolers full of alcohol just 2 years later in 2021. But the boat crash opened the floodgates to decades of hidden family crimes. The investigation revealed that Alex Murdaugh, Paul's father, had been systematically stealing millions from his law firm and clients for years. He'd been embezzling settlement money meant for injured clients, including a $4.3 million settlement from his own housekeeper's death. Gloria Satterfield had worked for the Murdaughs for over 20 years when she allegedly died from a trip and fall accident at their home in 2018. But here's where it gets suspicious. Alex had taken out a homeowner's insurance policy on the property just 1 month before her death. After she died, he convinced her family to sue him so they could collect from the insurance policy, promising to help them get compensation. The insurance companies paid out $4.3 million, but the Satterfield family never saw a penny. Alex and his co-conspirator attorney Corey Fleming kept all the money for themselves, telling the family the case was still ongoing. 4 years, the Satterfields had no idea they'd won millions in their lawsuit. Even worse, Alex later admitted in court that he'd completely fabricated the circumstances of Gloria's death, making up the story about her tripping over the family dogs. The stealing was absolutely massive. Alex admitted to taking $3.7 million in just 2019 alone. By the time investigators finished digging, they found he'd stolen over $8.5 million from clients, many of whom were vulnerable people who trusted him completely. One victim was an undocumented immigrant. Another was a man injured in a car wreck who needed the money for medical bills. Alex's drug addiction was fueling the theft. He was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on opioid pills, sometimes taking 60 pills a day. The addiction had completely drained his bank accounts, forcing him to steal from clients just to maintain his wealthy lifestyle and feed his habit. He owned multiple properties, including a 1,700-acre hunting lodge called Moselle, plus boats, beach houses, and employed full-time staff. On June 7, 2021, the walls finally closed in. Alex's law firm partners confronted him about missing client funds on the exact same day that his wife Maggie and son Paul were found shot to death at the family hunting lodge. Cell phone evidence later proved Alex was at the scene just minutes before the murders, contradicting his original alibi. The prosecution argued that Alex killed his family to distract from his financial crimes and gain sympathy. Facing exposure for decades of theft and a potential 25-year prison sentence for Paul in the boat crash case, Alex chose murder as his solution. He was convicted of both murders in March 2023 and sentenced to life in prison without parole. But the Murdaugh crimes go even deeper. The investigation into their murders reopened the cold case of 19-year-old Stephen Smith, whose body was found on a rural road in 2015. Initially ruled a hit and run, investigators now believe Stephen was murdered. There were rumors of a relationship between Stephen and Alex's surviving son Buster, though no evidence has confirmed this connection. Alex ultimately pleaded guilty to 22 counts of financial fraud and money laundering in state court, receiving 27 years in prison. He also got 40 years in federal prison for financial crimes, ensuring he'll never see freedom again. The Murdaugh legal dynasty that controlled South Carolina's Lowcountry for nearly a century ended with their patriarch as a convicted double murderer and one of the most prolific white-collar criminals in American history. This is getting dark, isn't it? If these stories are blowing your mind, smash that subscribe button because there's so much more corruption we're about to expose. The Kennedy dynasty's darkest secrets began long before Camelot ever existed. Joseph Kennedy Sr., the family patriarch, built their fortune through some seriously questionable methods during the 1920s and 30s. During Prohibition, Joe Kennedy owned whiskey barrels and bought 800 more barrels of smuggled alcohol in 1925. Bank records released in 2013 finally proved what organized crime figures have been claiming for decades, that Kennedy was deeply involved in bootlegging operations. Multiple mob bosses claimed direct connections with Kennedy. Auntie Madden, Frank Costello, and the infamous Lansky Siegel gang all insisted they worked with Joseph Kennedy during Prohibition. While some historians debate these connections, federal documents show Kennedy's bank owned substantial amounts of pre-Prohibition and smuggled whiskey, suggesting his alcohol business was far from legitimate. The timing was perfect for Kennedy. He positioned himself to get rich quick when Prohibition ended by securing government permits for importing medicinal liquor. But the family's most horrific secret involved their own daughter, Rosemary Kennedy. Born in 1918, Rosemary had intellectual disabilities that embarrassed Joseph Kennedy, who was already planning political careers for his sons. In 1941, when Rosemary was 23, she started sneaking out of her convent school at night, and the nuns worried she might get sexually involved with men. Her father panicked that this behavior would damage the family's reputation and political aspirations. Without telling his wife Rose, Joseph arranged for doctors to perform a lobotomy on Rosemary. The procedure was barbaric. Dr. James Watts described how they cut through the top of Rosemary's skull while she was awake and used an instrument that looked like a butter knife to slice through her brain tissue. As they cut, they made Rosemary recite the Lord's Prayer and sing songs, stopping only when she became incoherent. The lobotomy was catastrophic. Rosemary was reduced to the mental capacity of a 2-year-old child and couldn't walk or speak properly. The family immediately hid her away in a Wisconsin institution for the next 20 years, telling everyone she was mentally retarded rather than mentally ill to protect John's future presidential campaign. The doctor later admitted that Rosemary wasn't intellectually disabled at all. She had depression and anxiety, conditions that were treatable without surgery. The Kennedy mob connections became crucial during the 1960 presidential election. Multiple sources claim Joseph Kennedy met directly with Chicago outfit boss Sam Giancana before the election. According to these accounts, Kennedy promised that if Giancana helped get John elected, the federal government would go easy on organized crime. FBI wiretaps apparently confirmed that the mafia provided financial backing and ballot stuffing for Kennedy's Illinois campaign. The alleged deal involved massive voter fraud in Chicago. Crime bosses supposedly met in June 1960 to decide who would become the next president. They deployed hundreds of vote sluggers and vote floaters who physically coerced voters at polling places, breaking arms and legs of anyone who refused to vote for Kennedy. Frank Sinatra allegedly served as a go-between, meeting with Giancana on golf courses to avoid FBI surveillance. The election fraud claims are supported by the suspicious circumstances. Kennedy won Illinois by just 8,758 votes, which gave him the Electoral College victory. Without Illinois, Richard Nixon would have been president. Multiple investigations found evidence of systematic ballot tampering in Chicago precincts controlled by the outfit. But if the mob helped Kennedy win, they felt completely betrayed when Robert Kennedy became Attorney General and launched the most aggressive anti-organized crime campaign in American history. Instead of laying off the mob as promised, the Kennedys dramatically increased federal pressure on organized crime families nationwide. This double cross allegedly motivated the assassination of both John and Robert Kennedy, according to multiple organized crime figures. The family scandals continued into the next generation. On July 18, 1969, Ted Kennedy attended a party on Chappaquiddick Island with 6 young women who had worked on Robert's presidential campaign. Around midnight, Ted left with 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechne, supposedly to drive her to catch the ferry. But she left her handbag and room key behind, raising questions about their actual destination. Ted drove down a dirt road in the darkness and his car plunged off a bridge into a tidal channel. He escaped from the submerged vehicle, but Mary Jo was trapped inside. Instead of immediately calling police or getting help from nearby houses, Ted walked back to the party and only told 2 friends what had happened. They returned to dive for Mary Jo, but it was too late. Ted didn't report the accident for over 10 hours, waiting until the next morning after Mary Jo's body was already discovered. The autopsy found she had died from asphyxiation, not drowning, meaning she might have survived in an air pocket if rescue efforts had begun immediately. Ted received only a 2-month suspended sentence for leaving the scene of an accident, avoiding any serious criminal charges. Decades later, the family faced another scandal when William Kennedy Smith, Robert's son, was accused of rape at the Kennedy compound in Palm Beach in 1991. Patricia Bowman claimed Smith raped her on the beach after they met at a local bar. Despite her detailed testimony about the assault, Smith was acquitted after the jury deliberated for only 80 minutes. The trial highlighted how Kennedy family wealth and influence could shield members from consequences that would destroy ordinary people. These scandals reveal a pattern of using money, power, and connections to cover up crimes spanning from bootlegging and election fraud to lobotomizing family members and escaping accountability for deaths and sexual assault. The Johnson dynasty starts in 1886 when Samuel Curtis Johnson bought a small parquet flooring business in Racine, Wisconsin. At 53 years old, Samuel had already failed at railroads and bookstores before stumbling into what would become a chemical and cleaning empire. The company that started with just 4 employees making wooden floors would eventually grow into S.C. Johnson, one of the biggest private companies in America worth over $13 billion. Samuel's grandson Herbert Fisk Johnson Jr. really expanded the empire during the 1930s by traveling to Brazil to secure a direct source of carnauba wax. The family's timing was perfect during World War II when they couldn't get imported wax anymore. Their product called Johnson's Glow Coat became hugely popular and kept the business thriving through the Great Depression. By the 21st century, the 5th-generation family member Samuel Curtis Johnson III, known as Kurt, was living like absolute royalty. Worth over $2 billion, he controlled massive stakes in both S.C. Johnson and a spin-off company called Diversey. But behind the squeaky clean family company image, Kurt was hiding a horrific secret that would eventually destroy his reputation and expose how wealth shields people from real consequences. In March 2011, Kurt got arrested for repeatedly sexually assaulting his 12-year-old stepdaughter. The girl told investigators that Kurt had molested her between 15 to 20 times, starting when she was just 12 and continuing for years. She described him as very sexual and told police he was a sex addict with a touching problem. The abuse was systematic and predatory. Kurt would enter her bedroom at night and fondle her breasts, buttocks, and vaginal area. According to court documents, he used his mouth to molest her and frequently exposed himself through his pajama pants while asking her for intercourse. The girl told investigators that Kurt would tell her, "This is what boys will do to you," during the assaults. When the girl finally told her mother about the abuse in November 2010, it was because she wanted to protect her younger sister from the same fate. The mother confronted Kurt directly, and he immediately confessed everything to her. Despite this confession, it took months before authorities got involved. The case only came to light when the girl started receiving counseling in Scottsdale, Arizona, and made statements that required a mandatory report to authorities. Even then, both the victim and her mother consistently refused to cooperate with investigators, which severely weakened the prosecution's case. Kurt was initially charged with repeated sexual assault of a child, a felony that carried up to 40 years in prison and a $100,000 fine. But prosecutors had to reduce the charges to misdemeanors because they couldn't get cooperation from the victim or necessary medical records. The final charges were 4th-degree sexual assault and disorderly conduct. During his sentencing in June 2014, Judge Eugene Gacy-Orkiewicz noted that neither the victim nor her mother wanted to pursue charges against Kurt. The judge sentenced him to just 4 months in jail, far less than the maximum 1 year possible for the misdemeanor charges. Kurt also had to pay a $6,000 fine, which is pocket change for a billionaire. The sentence sparked national outrage about how wealth influences the justice system. Kurt served only about 3 months of his 4-month sentence before being released. For repeatedly molesting a child over several years, a billionaire got less jail time than most people get for drunk driving. Meanwhile, the family company was facing its own scandals involving deceptive environmental marketing practices. Starting in 2008, SC Johnson began using a green list label on products like Windex that made them appear environmentally friendly. The label stated green list ingredients, same great product, and directed consumers to a website for more information. But the green list system wasn't created by any independent environmental organization. SC Johnson developed the entire rating system themselves to make their products appear greener while continuing to use toxic chemicals. The label was deliberately designed to look like a third-party seal of approval when it was actually just the company's own marketing scheme. Multiple class action lawsuits were filed against SC Johnson for greenwashing consumers. Plaintiffs argued that the green list label misled people into thinking an objective environmental group had certified the products as safe and sustainable. The reality was that products like Windex still contained dangerous chemicals including parabens, phthalates, and triclosan. The company eventually settled the greenwashing lawsuits and removed the misleading labels, but they never admitted to any wrongdoing. Even today, SC Johnson continues openly testing products on animals despite owning supposedly cruelty-free brands like Method and Ecover. Animal rights groups are calling for boycotts of all SC Johnson brands until they stop animal testing completely. The family's tax practices have also raised serious questions. SC Johnson received the worst possible rating for likely use of tax avoidance strategies from ethical consumer watchdog groups. The company made over $400,000 in political donations during the 2017 to 2018 election cycle, with nearly 90% going to Republican candidates who support corporate tax breaks. Like many ultra-wealthy families, the Johnsons have used their massive resources to minimize legal consequences while continuing environmentally harmful business practices. Kurt's pathetically light sentence for child sexual abuse demonstrates how billionaire status can shield people from accountability that would destroy ordinary citizens. The Getty Empire started in 1892 when George Franklin Getty moved his family from Minnesota to Oklahoma to cash in on the oil boom. His son Jean Paul Getty initially wasn't interested in the family business, but after graduating from Oxford in 1913, he joined his father's company and quickly showed a talent for oil speculation. By age 23, Paul had made his first $1 million and immediately retired to live the Hollywood playboy lifestyle. Paul spent the next few years partying with movie stars like Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and Gloria Swanson while burning through wives at an alarming rate. He married and divorced 3 different women within a decade, showing a pattern of abandoning relationships whenever they became inconvenient. His father George was so disgusted with Paul's behavior that he lost all respect for his son and worried constantly about the future of their business. When Paul returned to work in 1919, he turned out to be an absolute genius at making money from oil. He negotiated a 30-year oil concession in the neutral zone between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait during the 1940s, which was considered an insane gamble since no oil had ever been found there. The bet paid off spectacularly in the 1950s when oil started flowing at 16 million barrels per year. Fortune magazine named him the richest man in the world in 1957 with a net worth between $2 and $4 billion. But Paul's attitude toward his family was absolutely monstrous. During his divorce proceedings from his first wife Jeanette, he literally screamed at her across the courtroom saying he was sick and tired of being married to her. According to people who knew him, he was regularly physically and verbally abusive to the women in his life. He went through 5 marriages total, treating wives and children like inconveniences that complicated his precious freedom. The most infamous example of Paul's heartless behavior happened in 1973 when his 16-year-old grandson John Paul Getty III got kidnapped in Rome. The Italian mafia demanded $17 million for the teenager's release, but Paul flatly refused to pay, saying if he paid 1 penny he would have 14 kidnapped grandchildren. 4 months, the boy was held captive in remote hideouts in southern Italy while his grandfather counted his money. After 4 months of captivity, the increasingly desperate kidnappers cut off the boy's ear and mailed it to a newspaper along with a bloody lock of his hair. The package included a note saying this is Paul's ear and if they didn't get money within 10 days, the other ear would arrive. Only then did the old man agree to negotiate, but he still refused to pay the full ransom. Paul finally agreed to pay $2.2 million, which was the maximum amount that would be tax deductible, and loaned his son the remaining $800,000 at 4% interest. Even when paying to save his own grandson's life, Paul found a way to make money off the deal and minimize his tax burden. After the boy was released, he called his grandfather to thank him for paying the ransom, but the old man refused to take the call. The trauma from the kidnapping destroyed John Paul Getty III's life completely. He resumed a jet-set lifestyle of heavy drug abuse and consorting with rock stars until he suffered a catastrophic stroke in his 20s that left him paralyzed and requiring constant care. He died in 2011 at age 54, never having recovered from the ordeal his grandfather put him through. The Getty family dysfunction continued into the next generation with Paul's son Gordon, who maintained a secret second family for years. In 1999, it was revealed that Gordon had fathered 3 illegitimate daughters with his longtime mistress Cynthia Beck while staying married to his wife Anne. The 3 illegitimate daughters actually lobbied to be included in the Getty inheritance, eventually winning recognition from their father. Amazingly, Gordon's wife Anne stayed married to him even after discovering his secret family, though she must have been devastated by the betrayal. The couple had 4 sons together, including Andrew Getty, who inherited the family pattern of dysfunctional relationships and substance abuse. Andrew lived a troubled life marked by serious medical conditions and volatile relationships. In March 2015, he obtained a restraining order against his on-and-off girlfriend Lanessa de Jong, claiming she was exploiting his serious medical condition that could kill him if his blood pressure rose. Andrew wrote in court documents that heated arguments could cause his blood pressure to spike dangerously and place him at grave risk of death. Just weeks later, Andrew was found dead at his Hollywood Hills mansion by the same girlfriend he had the restraining order against. The coroner found prescription medications at the scene and determined he had died from natural causes related to his medical conditions. Some reports indicated he was found naked from the waist down surrounded by blood, though the exact circumstances remained unclear. The autopsy revealed that Andrew had been struggling with methamphetamine use and had severe stomach ulcers at the time of his death. He had been complaining of stomach pain and wasn't eating or sleeping well in his final months. The Getty curse of addiction, dysfunction, and early death had claimed another victim in a family where vast wealth couldn't buy happiness, health, or functional relationships. The Kenyatta dynasty seized control of Kenya during the country's independence transition in 1963 when Jomo Kenyatta became the nation's first prime minister and then president. But what many Kenyans didn't realize was that Kenyatta had made secret deals with British colonial authorities that would allow his family to accumulate massive wealth at the expense of ordinary citizens who had fought for independence. The first major betrayal happened immediately after independence through something called the Million-Acre Scheme. Instead of giving land back to displaced Africans for free, Kenyatta agreed with the British that Kenyans would have to buy back their own ancestral lands using loans that would take decades to repay. This scheme was designed to protect British and white settler interests while enriching a small group of African elites who could afford to purchase the best properties. Jomo Kenyatta used this arrangement to grab enormous amounts of prime real estate for himself and his family. By December 1966, Kenyatta had bought more than 3,895 acres in Nairobi and Ruiru for 472,740 shillings. The government also simply gave him an additional 178 acres in Nairobi plus another 509 acres elsewhere. Land records show properties were registered in Kenyatta's name, his wife Mama Njina's name, and his sons Peter Magana and Peter Mwigai. The land grabbing got even more brazen along Kenya's coast where Kenyatta illegally seized 250 acres of trust land that was supposed to belong to local communities. In 1972, he took all of the Tiwi and Diani trust lands, turning the local people into squatters on their own ancestral territory. These coastal areas are now prime tourist destinations where land sells for 15 million Kenyan shillings per acre. When local communities refused Kenyatta's offer of just 600 shillings per acre as compensation, He told them the land would go to the government regardless of their wishes. The systematic theft extended to giving his children wedding gifts of stolen government land. In 1976, Kenyatta gave his son a large tract of government land as a wedding present that was acquired without official approval and without following legal procedures. This pattern of using presidential power for personal enrichment became the template that would guide the family for generations. When Kenyatta died in 1978, his successor Daniel Arap Moi continued protecting the family's interests while building his own corrupt network. The Kenyatta Empire actually expanded during Moi's 24-year reign as they founded Brookside Dairy in 1993, which would become Kenya's largest milk processing company. They also acquired major stakes in banks and upscale hotels throughout East Africa. The family's wealth accumulation accelerated when Uhuru Kenyatta, Jomo's son, entered politics in the late 1990s. By 2002, opposition politicians were campaigning specifically against decades of loot and plunder by the Kenyatta network. But instead of facing consequences, Uhuru was appointed leader of the opposition in parliament and positioned to eventually claim the presidency. Forbes magazine ranked Uhuru Kenyatta as Kenya's richest person and the 26th wealthiest in Africa by 2011, 2 years before he was elected president as a self-described anti-corruption crusader. The irony was stunning. A man whose family had systematically looted the country for 50 years was now promising to fight corruption. The Pandora Papers revealed in 2021 just how extensively the Kenyatta family had been hiding their wealth offshore. 7 family members were connected to 13 different offshore companies and foundations worth over $30 million in Panama and the British Virgin Islands. They had enlisted one of Switzerland's largest banks, Union Bancaire Privée, to establish a Panamanian foundation to manage and shelter their wealth. One company owned by Uhuru's brother Mohoho held an investment portfolio worth $31.6 million in 2016. From 1999 to 2004, Uhuru's mother Angina and his 2 sisters used a British Virgin Islands company to buy an apartment in an upscale London neighborhood. The family had been secretly building this offshore empire since at least the 1970s. Meanwhile, their domestic business empire kept expanding through questionable methods. Brookside Dairy systematically bought out competitors like Buziki, Elara, Tuzo, and Delamere to control nearly half of Kenya's milk processing market. The Competition Authority approved these acquisitions despite concerns about creating a monopoly that would hurt small-scale dairy farmers. The family's grip on Kenya's economy extends far beyond dairy. They hold significant stakes in major banks, including what is now NCBA Group, which is currently in takeover talks with South Africa's Standard Bank. Their business interests span across financial services, real estate, agriculture, and hospitality throughout East Africa. What makes the Kenyatta story particularly egregious is how they've maintained power across multiple generations while systematically impoverishing the very people who fought for Kenya's independence. They grabbed land equivalent to the size of entire provinces while ordinary Kenyans remained landless. The family that was supposed to lead Kenya to prosperity instead treated the country like their personal piggy bank, hiding billions offshore while campaigning against the very corruption they pioneered. The Ford dynasty built their empire on motorcars, but they've hidden a legacy of anti-Semitism, violence, and drug connections that spans multiple generations. Henry Ford transformed manufacturing with the Model T and assembly line production, but in 1920, he bought a weekly newspaper called the Dearborn Independent specifically to spread his anti-Semitic beliefs. For 7 years, Ford published a 91-article series called The International Jew that distributed copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion to over 900,000 readers. The Protocols were a fabricated Russian document claiming Jews were plotting world domination, but Ford treated them as fact and blamed Jewish people for everything he disliked about modern society. Ford's anti-Semitic newspaper was sold at every Ford dealership across America and translated into 16 languages for international distribution. Adolf Hitler kept a portrait of Henry Ford on his desk and called him his inspiration, even awarding Ford the Grand Cross of the German Eagle in 1938. Ford's Nazi connections went far beyond ideological support into actual business partnerships. Ford Werke, the company's German subsidiary, became what a 1945 U.S. Army report called an arsenal of Nazism. The plant used forced laborers, including prisoners of war and concentration camp inmates, to manufacture vehicles for Hitler's war machine. Even after America entered World War II, Ford continued collaborating with Nazi authorities through their French operations until at least August 1942. Secret Treasury Department documents revealed that Edsel Ford, Henry's son, actively encouraged Ford executives in occupied France to work with German officials. The Ford family received massive profits from Nazi war production, while American soldiers were dying fighting the same regime they were helping. They only stopped when the U.S. government finally forced them to end their German operations. But the violence wasn't limited to international affairs. Henry Ford created a private army called the Service Department, led by a violent thug named Harry Bennett, who recruited boxers, wrestlers, and Detroit gang members as Ford security. This 8,000-man force terrorized union organizers and Ford employees who complained about working conditions. On March 7, 1932, Bennett and the Dearborn police opened fire on unemployed workers marching to demand jobs, killing a 16-year-old boy named Joe Bussell and wounding dozens more. The most infamous incident happened on May 26, 1937, during what became known as the Battle of the Overpass. When United Auto Workers organizers tried to distribute leaflets at Ford's River Rouge plant, Bennett's thugs brutally beat them while news photographers captured the violence. The pictures showed UAW leaders Walter Reuther and Richard Frankenstein bloodied and beaten, with 16 union members injured, including 7 women. Bennett tried to destroy the evidence by attacking photographers, but the images were already published and turned public opinion against Ford's violent tactics. The family's criminal behavior continued for generations in an unexpected location: Toronto, Canada. The Ford family there, though not directly related to the car company founder, built their own political dynasty while secretly dealing drugs. Doug Ford, who became Ontario Premier, sold hashish throughout the 1980s from a mall parking lot near the family home. 10 sources who knew Doug confirmed he was the go-to dealer for hash in Etobicoke for 7 years until 1986. Doug's operation wasn't small-time dealing. Former customers described buying quarter to half-pound quantities of hash for $400 to $425 each. One source named Sheila told reporters that if Doug wasn't available, others would sell for him because it was a full operation. His older brother Randy ran a separate drug business in the same area and was charged in connection with a drug-related kidnapping. The family's drug connections became international news when Doug's younger brother Rob Ford became Toronto's mayor and was caught on video smoking crack cocaine in 2013. Rob had been arrested for DUI and marijuana possession in Miami in 1999, but his crack smoking scandal destroyed his political career. He eventually entered drug rehabilitation but died of cancer in 2016. Back in America, the original Ford Motor Company faced major environmental scandals for decades of toxic waste dumping. In the 1990s, Ford admitted to installing illegal defeat devices in 60,000 Econoline vans that increased smog-causing nitrogen oxide emissions when driven at highway speeds. They paid $7.8 million in fines, but only after the EPA forced them to recall the vehicles. Even worse, Ford dumped thousands of tons of toxic paint sludge containing lead, arsenic, and uranium on tribal lands belonging to the Ramapo Lenape Nation in New Jersey during the 1960s and 70s. The contamination caused cancer and birth defects among Native Americans living there, but Ford concealed the full extent of pollution for decades. New Jersey is now suing Ford for willful environmental damage and seeking punitive damages for their ongoing cover-up. The personal scandals continued with multiple DUI arrests affecting Ford family members. Henry Ford II was arrested for drunk driving in Santa Barbara in 1975 while with his mistress, famously telling reporters afterward that he never drives better than when he's been drinking. His daughter Elena Ford was arrested for DUI in 2011 with her child in the car, receiving probation and community service. The Mellon Empire started in 1869 when Thomas Mellon founded T. Mellon & Sons Bank in Pittsburgh, but what most people don't know is that the family has been systematically gaming the American tax system and creating illegal monopolies for over a century. Andrew Mellon became America's longest-serving Treasury Secretary from 1921 to 1932, but he used his position to enrich his own companies while claiming to serve the public interest. The corruption was so brazen that Andrew literally controlled hundreds of corporations while serving as the nation's top financial officer. He owned massive stakes in banks, oil companies, aluminum production, and even distilleries during Prohibition. When he became Treasury Secretary, he simply transferred his stock holdings to his brother Richard King Mellon and continued making all the business decisions behind the scenes. This wasn't subtle manipulation, it was an open mockery of conflict of interest laws. Andrew's most notorious scheme involved the Aluminum Company of America, known as Alcoa, which the Mellon family had founded and controlled since 1888. By the 1920s, Alcoa controlled 90% of all aluminum production in the United States, making it one of the most complete monopolies in American history. The company literally owned the entire aluminum supply chain from bauxite mines to finished products, ensuring no competitor could challenge their stranglehold. While serving as Treasury Secretary, Andrew used his government position to protect Alcoa's monopoly in multiple ways. He increased tariffs on foreign aluminum imports, making international competition impossible. He also prevented antitrust investigators from pursuing monopoly charges against his own company for over a decade. Federal prosecutors wanted to break up Alcoa as early as 1924, but the case mysteriously stalled whenever it reached higher levels of government. The aluminum monopoly generated obscene profits for the Mellon family while price-fixing hurt every American consumer and business that needed aluminum products. Alcoa charged whatever prices they wanted because customers had literally no alternatives. During World War II, the monopoly became a national security threat because America desperately needed aluminum for aircraft production, but Alcoa couldn't meet demand. The government had to build $500 million worth of competing aluminum plants just to supply the war effort. Even more corrupt was Andrew's manipulation of the tax code while serving as Treasury Secretary. He designed tax policies that appeared to benefit all wealthy Americans but were actually crafted to maximize his own family's savings. The Treasury Department accused him of planning, scheming, contriving, and devising a comprehensive system of tax evasions and tax avoidance while holding the office of Secretary of the Treasury. They calculated that he defrauded the government of about $2 million in taxes owed for 1931 alone. One particularly sleazy scheme involved Andrew donating his art collection to create the National Gallery of Art. The Treasury initially granted him a massive tax exemption for this charitable donation, but investigators later discovered the gift was structured as part of his overall tax avoidance plan. He timed the donation to offset other taxable income and used creative accounting to inflate the artwork's value. When the Treasury tried to revoke the tax exemption, Andrew's estate fought the decision in court for years. The family's criminal behavior extended into scientific fraud through the Mellon Institute, which they founded in 1913 supposedly to advance industrial research. But the institute actually functioned as a propaganda machine that helped dangerous industries cover up health hazards for decades. The asbestos industry used Mellon Institute research to delay recognition of the cancer link and prevent workplace safety regulations. Documents prove that Mellon Institute scientists knew asbestos caused cancer as early as the 1940s but helped manufacturers hide this information from workers and the public. The Institute's Industrial Hygiene Foundation coordinated with companies like Johns Manville to manipulate scientific literature and confuse juries in later lawsuits. This deliberate cover-up contributed to thousands of preventable deaths from mesothelioma and lung cancer. The corruption continued into the next generation with Richard Mellon Scaife, Andrew's grandnephew, who inherited $430 million and used it to corrupt American politics for 50 years. Starting in 1972, Scaife gave $1 million to Richard Nixon's re-election campaign, including $45,000 to a clandestine fund directly tied to Watergate. He essentially bought Nixon the presidency and helped create the corrupt political culture that still plagues Washington today. Scaife spent decades funding right-wing propaganda operations disguised as think tanks and news organizations. He created the Heritage Foundation, bankrolled neoconservative writers, and established a network of fake news sources that spread conspiracy theories about political opponents. His most obsessive project was trying to destroy Bill Clinton through something called the Arkansas Project, which spread false stories about Clinton through publications like the American Spectator. When Hillary Clinton talked about a vast right-wing conspiracy on national television, she was specifically referring to Richard Mellon Scaife's network of dirty tricks operations. Scaife dumped millions of dollars into bogus investigations and character assassination campaigns that consumed the nation's attention during the Clinton presidency. His tactics became the template for modern political warfare, where wealthy families use their fortunes to manipulate public opinion and destroy enemies. The Mellon legacy shows how one family used government positions, monopoly power, and dark money politics to accumulate massive wealth while systematically corrupting American institutions. From tax evasion to scientific fraud to political manipulation, they pioneer techniques that other wealthy families still use today to avoid accountability. If these 10 families shocked you, wait until you see our next video about billionaire cults that control entire governments. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss these explosive investigations that mainstream media won't touch. These 10 families prove that money doesn't just corrupt, it weaponizes. From pharmaceutical empires that killed hundreds of thousands, to chemical dynasties that poisoned entire communities, to political families built on murder and fraud, wealth becomes a shield that makes the impossible possible. They bought judges, silenced victims, and turned their crimes into legacies spanning generations. The scariest part isn't just what they did, but how they're still doing it today. Wealth without accountability creates monsters in mansions. If this opened your eyes to how power really works, subscribe for more shocking truths they don't want you to know.